from the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Humanities, and we're pleased to bring you today's program. Our program is the Hollingsworth Lecture in Practical Ethics, made possible by the university's Institute for Practical Ethics and Public Life. And also supporting this program are UVA's Department of Public Health Sciences and the Cancer Center's Breast Care Program. On the 13th of June 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down patents on the hereditary BRCA genes, mutations of which carry high risk of breast and ovarian cancer. One company, Utah-based Myriad Genetics, claimed ownership of these genes and both marketed and processed the test for them. Myriad now controls the genetic data of the persons the company has tested for the BRCA genes. In the wake of the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling against Myriad, there's vigorous debate now about who owns this genetic information and who should control it. Should the data be held by a private company or in a commons? Should control rest with the BRCA positive community? A new grassroots campaign, Free the Data, brings voices of BRCA positive individuals, biomedical investigators, physicians, and organized medicine in the form of the American Medical Association alike into this debate. Our Medical Center Hour, Freeing Patients' BRCA Data, features filmmaker Joanna Rudnick, whose acclaimed 2008 documentary film In the Family told the story of choices faced by women who are BRCA positive. Joanna herself figured centrally in the film, was active in the legal battles against Myriad Genetics, and is active now in the Free the Data campaign. We welcome Joanna via Skype from her home in San Francisco. She's joined in the auditorium by GYN oncologist Susan Modesitt and law professor Mimi Foster-Riley, both from UVA, for an exploration of what's at stake in opening access to this genetic data. We're actually going to start the program with a video called Free the Data that was made by Joanna Rudnick and released just this fall to initiate the Free the Data campaign. So we'll start with that, and then we'll hear from Joanna, and following that from Dr. Modesitt and Professor Riley.
Trying to capture a narrative that's engaging, that retains the accuracy of the science, but has an artistic license to it that compels people to look at it and really be visually pleased, but also stimulated to try to figure out what this piece means. There's 3 billion positions along the genome in which things can go right, which things can go wrong, and one of those places can literally change someone's life.
Very unfortunate that something as frequent, as common as hereditary breast and ovarian cancer should be analyzed and interpreted in a completely closed black box manner. To me, is just not good medicine.
I think when we first get diagnosed, we always get the feeling that we are alone, that nobody else has this mutation. And by looking at this mural, you realize that we're all interconnected. Internally, we have genes that they may work or they may not work, but they make us what we are. And now that we're going to free the data, we're going to be able to give the opportunity to people that we survivors might not have had on time.
On this piece, maybe you can find them. There are these 2 long lines here and here. These are the proteins of BRCA1 and BRCA2. And so where your proteins, where your genome is different, is marked by the circles.
I don't want other women to have to go through the suffering and the wondering that I grew up with and that my sister grew up with and that she died and took to her grave. It is my information, and I want it to be shared. I owe that to my sister and her memory.
I was diagnosed with breast cancer when nursing my second daughter. She was 3 months old. And I'm freeing the data because I want better answers. I don't want removing body parts to be the only option to prevent breast and ovarian cancer. And I certainly don't want that for my children.
My data need to be free to help others. It should not be in the hands of one company. If you can use my data to help a race of people or help people in general, then it needs to be free.
I'm freeing my data so that in the future, women won't have to decide between motherhood and life.
So that men can have some clarity about their own protocols, their own treatment plans.
Because I know how high the stakes are.
There are different risks for different mutations, and I want that information to be available.
We do have part of the puzzle, but unless we get the rest of the puzzle together, we won't have a complete answer.
How many more people are going to have breast and ovarian cancer? How many more Latinos, how many more Caucasian, African American, Asian, anybody, you know? We're never going to find the answer if we don't free the data.
Here we go.
So you are live.
Okay, great. Hello everyone. I can see you. I wish I could be there with you today, but I'm thrilled to be joining you via Skype. And I want to thank Professor Childress for putting this really important discussion together. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. Yes. Fantastic. Okay, you just met me in the video. I was painting in yellow, and I had given you the update I'd like to tell you in the video that I was recently diagnosed in December of 2012, very recently, with breast cancer. And I found my breast cancer while I was nursing my youngest daughter. She was 3 months old. And after recovering from the cancer treatment, the chemotherapy, and a 10-hour surgery to have a bilateral mastectomy and oophorectomy, I got a call from Sharon Perry from Genetic Alliance that said, we're going to do this Free the Data campaign. Will you come on and be our face of it and help us get the word out? So I probably should have been recovering, but instead of that, I was so thrilled by the Supreme Court decision on June 13th, which was my 39th birthday, so a very wonderful birthday present, about what they were doing with the Free the Data campaign, that I decided to jump on board and create this video. So in order to give you a little bit of a sense of why I would do that, rather than staying in bed and still recovering, I need to sort of take you back to 2001. And what happened in 2001 is that I found out that I had the BRCA1 mutation. And I had just gotten back from a trip to India. I was 27 years old at the time, and spoke to my sister on the phone, and she said, did Mom talk about the gene? Never heard of BRCA. My mother died in cancer in 1985, so it had been almost years at this point since her cancer. We never talked about it. It was behind the past. And I was completely shocked that this gene was up there, first of all, and that my mother was positive. And when I went on test positive myself, I was a very, again, this is 2001, Angela, people were talking about this information.
Just to let you know, you're breaking up just a little bit. If we could talk a little bit more slowly, that might help just a little bit.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. Again, this was 2001, and I had tested positive, and there were no place like myself who had BRCA and who didn't know what to do with the information, and there was no real publication. And I felt incredibly stigmatized by the information. And I was already documented, and this led me to tell the story or document and read to other women who were in the situation to help normalize what it meant for BRCA. Also, very discrimination and discrimination at any level. This were the genetic undiscriminated from insurance, health discrimination. This was time again, and I was afraid that I would be discriminated on a personal level. Would want to marry me, have children with me, knowing my child could have mutations. These were complicated ethical questions, and I didn't look for the discussion tools we needed to really model these stories in real. What did it mean to have this information, this diagnosis of risk, and then into the world and try to live their life? And the process of making the and talking, I noticed commonality. Well, today's conference.
Joanne, I'm sorry, you're really breaking up really bad. I know there's nothing you can do to control it, and there's nothing I can do to control it, but we're missing a lot of your story, and I apologize. We could try reconnecting and see if that helps.
Yeah, let's try that. Before you and I were having the same issue.
Yeah, I mean, I did move the computer over a little bit. I don't think that would make a difference, but I'll put it back where we had it. Let's try reconnecting.
Sure.
And I'll have you call me if that's okay.
Okay, let's try this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, do I sound any better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Crossing my fingers. Okay.
Okay, does anyone, just looking at the audience out there, do you want me to back up? Did you get anything of what I was saying?
Yeah, we did. We got it. We're good.
Got it. Okay, good. Okay, so in Making in the Family, I met a woman named Martha Higley, and I started to hear Martha's story. And Martha is an African-American woman, 3-time breast cancer survivor, and she wanted to find out if BRCA caused her breast cancer. And Martha at the time didn't have a job. She lost a job when she was diagnosed with breast cancer for the time and wanted to get tested. And what struck me was that the only place for her to get testing was through an Avon-funded program at the county hospital in Chicago. The test that Myriad Genetics was offering was $3,000 at the time. It is now more money. And at the time, in Illinois at the time, Medicaid did not for BRCA testing, which was her insurance. So she had to go to this program at county hospital. And the physician at the time said to me, Avon doesn't renew our fund. I won't be able to offer this potentially life-saving information to these women. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, Joanne, I'm going to recommend using your headphones.
Okay.
To make sure the audio is not being canceled out by your computer.
Okay.
The gating of the audio.
I am so sorry that we're having these problems. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's intermittent, but this is the last thing I can do to try to,
Okay.
and see if that helps.
Okay, is this any better?
This connection was better than the last.
Okay. I'm gonna try. So I went with Martha to get her testing, and the physician at the time, a woman named Pam Ganshaw, told me that Martha, do I sound better?
Yes. Much better.
Okay. Oh, yay! I'm so sorry. I really want to be there with you. That the program could go away and she wouldn't be able to offer the testing. And what I learned was that the reason why the test cost $3,000 was that there was a patent on this gene, and this company, Myriad Genetics, had no competition. They had a monopoly on the gene. And this led me to go to Myriad Genetics with Margaret's story in my mind and challenge the founder of Myriad Genetics on why it was okay to patent part of our body. So why don't we show that clip to give you a break from it. It's hard to hear. So just show the Myriad clip.
Yeah.
John, can we show the Myriad clip now?
Say that again?
Show the clip.
Show the clip.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yes, it's coming.
Now I'm having hearing problems.
Technology.
And I will switch back to you as soon as it's over. Yeah, it was better.
When it comes to who's getting tested and who isn't, the conversation leads to Myriad Genetics. When I tested for the BRCA mutation, my blood sample was sent here. Myriad Genetics owns the patent on the BRCA1 and 2 genes, and they control all commercial testing in the U.S.
We're now receiving about 350 samples a day. Let's move on a little bit. These are people. These have the DNA that is a part of each of those people in these packages. I think the single greatest inventive thing I did was to create Myriad.
After Mary Clara King's initial discovery, labs across the country, including hers, entered into a race to find the exact location of the BRCA1 gene. Mark Skolnick launched Myriad with that goal in mind.
She put us in the solar system, okay? Then it needed to be located to the planet and the continent and the state. It became the media genetics race.
Now a painstaking gene-by-gene search is on for the critical mutation.
King's lab has been getting tantalizingly close to its goal.
Researchers believe they will isolate the breast cancer gene within a few months.
We did it to win the race. The group that was in that laboratory, working 7 days a week, we're doing it to beat the other team, period. And we won. Here's the BRCA1 patent.
Linked breast and ovarian cancer susceptibility gene, patent 5747282. So the most controversial patent would be the composition.
There's no controversial patent. It's all very, very easy to understand if you take the time.
When I tell women about the patent, the reaction I get is, how can you patent a gene? It exists in nature. It's like patenting your thumb. What if Watson and Crick had patented the DNA molecule? Nobody would have ever been able to do any research.
Of course, patents don't affect research. There have been more publications on BRCA1 and 2 than almost anything else. People aren't upset about having patents for their iPods, or patents for their telephones, or patents for their computers, or patents for their cars. If it weren't for patents, modern society would not exist.
Well, I would argue that people are upset because there's money being made on something that exists in nature.
Right. If we make this huge, multi-tens of $1 million investment in educating the market, don't we have a right to deliver the test? The facts are that women are getting tested, and their lives are getting saved, and I guarantee you, they would not be being tested if it weren't for Myriad. I claim you would not be tested if it weren't for Myriad. You would have not been tested. There'd be no reimbursement. I don't have evidence. All I know is that doctors were not prepared to do this. We had to teach doctors. We've taken every problem that comes up and solved it because we have a commercial interest.
A controversial new television ad is making headlines this morning. It urges women to get a genetic test to see if they are likely to get breast cancer. Take a look.
Breast cancer runs in my family. My mother, my grandmother, my dad's sisters. I wondered if it would be inevitable. I found out it didn't have to be. I found out my risk through BRCA analysis.
And you said, when the test came out, that this is going to be a less expensive test. This test will one day be hundreds of dollars. So why is it still $3,000? Why is it increasing?
That's a good question. And I think there's a point at which we have to start looking at decreasing the cost of the test.
The critical thing, in my view, about the patents that we hold is that none of them are exclusively licensed. So they are all completely open for anybody to use for research purposes. And any company that wishes to license them can license them for a trivial amount of money. I don't know what it is, but my last royalty check was literally $2.73. Nowadays, when we find genes, we just publish them. We don't patent them at all.
Okay, you're back with us.
Okay, great. And let me know how I'm sounding. Just to place you all in time, that was 2007, that interview with Mark Skolnick, the co-founder of Myriad. And what happened in 2009 was that the ACLU filed a case, as we know, to challenge, with a number of plaintiffs, but brought a case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And of course, as we mentioned at the beginning and in the video, on June 13th, those patents were declared invalid. Since that time, other companies have brought out a product in BRCA testing in these panels of other breast cancer genes along with BRCA, and Myriad has sued them all, pretty much. So that's where we're at right now. And the cost of the Myriad test with full sequencing, all components, is now around $4,000. Mary Claire King, who you see there, who actually discovered the BRCA gene, has another test that she's putting out with the University of Washington. That's a competitive test. So we're in a time of flux, but I just read this morning that Myriad had record profits in Q3, up 52% with the what they call the Angelina Jolie effect. So this is all very relevant. But what happened to me was that after I went to Myriad, I went to Canada in the film. Again, this is around 2007. And I got tested in Canada. Unfortunately, I had the same result. I was still positive. The testing itself in Canada cost around $300 with some different technology. They did not uphold the Myriad patent in Ontario. But the physician who tested me, who was the leading breast cancer researcher in Canada, Dr. Stephen Narod, said to me, "You're focused on the patent, but the real problem is the information." Since 2006, they have stopped publishing the information they're finding, all the variation within the BRCA genes. So the data on every single person who's tested, they are not publishing that and making it public. They're keeping that information proprietary as a trade secret, because they know once the patent gets overturned, challenged as it did, what has most value is that information. So that kind of put a light bulb in my head. And the first time I thought about this issue of there's nothing that requires them to share that information and make it. And after the spiritual that's full circle video that you saw closing out my is the information for the came from experience I had at Myriad when I was there.
Joanne, you're breaking up again, and we've kind of missed the last half a minute of what you were saying. I'm sorry.
I know that. Is there anything I can do?
I just say talk closer. Talk closer to your screen, and maybe you can highlight the last 30 minutes in short phrases.
Okay.
I'm sorry, last 30 seconds.
I was saying that the free the Good video came out of an experience I had at Myriad Genetics, where I walked down a hall that had a schematic of the BRCA 1 and 2 gene. Can you hear this?
Yes.
Okay. And I was able to ask their chief scientific officer where my mutation lived on those genes, and also who had tested for my mutation. And I had a unique mutation that only myself and my mother have tested for. And I was able to visualize it and also find out information we don't know because Myriad has database. And so when I created the video, I brought in a bioinformatician from Vancouver, Canada, with a street artist, and we created a community mural that has an accurate depiction of the BRCA gene and where those people who are painting the mutation on. They were able to have that experience. I had visualized that mutation as part of the movement to take our information. And free data is a grassroots patient movement. We can submit our own information through this website, Privacy Protected, to the PLINVAR, the National Center for Biotechnology Information's public data. So every researcher out there can uncover all the variation of BRCA, and so every single testing company can provide the most accurate results and compete. And I watched the video, and I said it's been 17 years since BRCA testing is commercially available, and yet still have to body to avoid disease. And I do the same therapy that Mom had in 1985. I know we need better. We need to all barriers. I don't want to take up more time. I don't want it to be here. I think I should turn to Marcia at this point. Okay. Not for at the end. Thank you. And the reason out there that I'm having questions from the press are very limited talk that I would be there, not so hard to think.
We're going to leave you connected so you can hear our other speakers, Joanne, and we're going to go to their PowerPoint right now, and I'll move your view so you can see it as well.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so I have no connection problem. So first of all, I'm glad everyone is here. It is great to get to catch up again with Joanna. She was here a couple years ago when we did a screening of In the Family. And it's always good for me as a physician taking care of women facing these challenges to kind of step back a little from the science and the, oh, here's what we're going to do medically, and really think about all the implications that go on with it. So my role here is really the straight man, or woman, I guess, as the case may be, to really talk about what BRCA 1 and 2 mean, because I think sometimes the way it was presented when we had the Myriad direct-to-consumer advertising campaign, which was an utter and complete nightmare for me as a clinician. You know, it's presented that all you have to do is go out and get this test, and you will know whether you have the risk of breast and ovarian cancer. So it's really important to know a little bit more about the background, because it's not that easy. Okay. Okay, good. So we'll talk about ovarian cancer because we get short shift on everything. If you look at ovarian cancer, really, most ovarian cancer is what we call sporadic, meaning it is not caused by an aberrant gene, okay? So having a BRCA1 or 2 carrier is the highest risk you can have for developing ovarian cancer, but there are other risk factors, and I've listed them here. I know I'm going to screw up the actual...
That's all right. There's 3 ways to go forward.
Yeah, I was trying to find the pointer, but apparently I went to the end.
The dial at 12 o'clock. Let me get this screen off there for you. So
okay.
The dial at 12 o'clock, very top of the dial.
That one. All right. Woo. I'm armed and dangerous then. So other things that go along with it, older age, never having had children, and some protective things I want you to keep in mind. A hysterectomy or a tubal ligation drops your risk of ovarian cancer. And birth control pills get short shrift, but they are the greatest thing since sliced bread. Not only do they prevent pregnancy, which is why they were designed and all that, and that's great, but they also reduce your risk of ovarian cancer, both genetic and non-genetic. So if you take them for 5 years, just remember that. Okay. Oh, 2. And breast cancer risk factors. Most of these are pretty well known. Most breast cancers in women, but remember, it can happen in men, especially men that carry the BRCA genes. The BRCA mutation, again, the above and beyond the highest risk factor for developing breast cancer. Therapeutic chest radiation, so not just you had a chest x-ray, but you had Hodgkin's lymphoma or something like that where you had high-dose radiation to your chest. And then again, you'll see some of the very common risk factors with ovarian cancer as well, not having had children, having your first child later, and again, some of the other factors there. Okay, now remember, all cancers are genetic. What happens with a cancer is that you have a mutation that essentially takes off the brakes for cells. And so instead of growing to a certain point, they keep going. And not only they go where they are, they go other places, which is the hallmark of cancer. And so what happens if you start off life with a mutation in a gene that normally prevents these cells from becoming malignant, you'll see that you then develop these other mutations and you develop a cancer. And if you started off with a mutation, that cancer happens earlier than if you didn't start with a mutation there. But the other thing that why the data being freed is so important is not every single woman with even one of these really high-risk mutations develops a cancer. So what's different about my 85-year-old patient who has the same mutation as her daughter? The 85-year-old has never had any cancer, yet her daughter got breast cancer at 30. And that's why they got diagnosed, is because the daughter was evaluated and found to have a mutation. But we don't know what was different about the mother versus the daughter. We don't know what was different about that variation, what other genes might have played into it. And so that's what we're really missing, and that's why it's so important to get more of the data. So clues to hereditary cancer syndromes? Well, you have related cancers. If you have a family that has both breast cancer and ovarian cancer together, or some other syndromes that we're not going to talk about today, like Lynch syndrome or Cowden syndrome, which have a whole other set of mutations that can cause cancer. So cancers that are linked together that we know go together, related cancers in the same person, so a woman that has both endometrial cancer and ovarian cancer, we think about Lynch syndrome, or both breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And lastly, age at diagnosis. These hereditary cancers are generally diagnosed much earlier than the non-hereditary types. So again, as I mentioned before, if you look at all ovarian cancer, only 10 to 20% are genetic, and the majority of those actually for ovarian cancer, and this is going to be different than breast cancer, the majority of these, about 90% are going to be BRCA1 and 2 mutations. Again, just of the hereditary types. And then we have the Lynch and some other single gene mutations. Breast cancer is a little different. There seems to be a lot more pathways to get to breast cancer genetically. And if you look again at all of the hereditary breast cancers, half of them are these BRCA mutations, but we have a lot of others that are unidentified. But again, these are groups where we look at the family, that every woman in the family has breast cancer. We know it's hereditary, we just don't know why. And again, the importance of getting the data that Myriad has. So these are large tumor suppressor genes. They fix DNA errors that we make and prevent cancer. Okay, so how likely is it that someone sitting in the audience with even no family history would have a BRCA mutation? So for the general U.S. population, it's about 1 in 400 to 800. So really, really low risk that anyone in here would carry a BRCA mutation. But there are certain populations that are much higher. Ashkenazi Jewish families have a 1 in 40 chance. And some of these other populations, Scandinavian, Netherlands, kind of Eastern European groups, also have a higher risk of BRCA mutations. This is actually based on Myriad data. This is something they published a couple years ago that it doesn't project very well, and I apologize for that, but you look at the patient and then you look at the family history. And so if you have a patient that has no cancer and there's no risk, there's no family history, about a 2.8% risk of having a BRCA mutation. If the patient has breast cancer under 50, but there's no other cancer in the family, it goes to a 7% risk. If that patient has breast cancer and there's breast and ovarian cancer in the family, you're looking at these 39, 46% risk of having a BRCA mutation. And again, this is just first pass data that they're willing to let go. But what we don't have is all the variants and all the other things that go along with it. So Angelina Jolie, I mean, we all saw the effect of that. And I applaud her and other women like Christina Applegate who have come forward and talked about what this means, because it is really important. And there's some other genes besides the BRCA2, the Lynch syndrome and leishmania that go along with it. So what do you do when you think this might be the case? It's fall. I have kids. You gotta love these. So genetic testing, insurance coverage. Okay, this was when we started off really hard to know who was going to get coverage and who wasn't. The insurance companies, I'm sure they're in it to help people, but they're also in it to make money. And so they have figured out that if they diagnose women with these mutations and we can take preventative action and prevent a cancer, it's almost worth any amount of money to prevent a cancer. Okay, so they're willing to test in the appropriate spots. Maybe, and I've not had trouble getting someone coverage for genetic testing who really needed it so far. Could it be cheaper? Could it be easier? Absolutely. But so far I've been able to get most of them. And so up until 2013, everybody had to go through Myriad. And so it just has happened, and we are still struggling with it in the clinic on who should we use. I have someone that I think I want a BRCA mutation on. Should I go with Myriad where they have the best data on if we get these weird variants? Is it really a cancer one, or is it just a variant that's not associated with cancer? So do I go with Myriad? Do I pay the $4,000? Do I keep going with that system because they do a good product? I will give them that. Or do I go with the University of Washington and their BRCA? Do I go with Cancer Next? Do I go with Arnies Genetics? Do I go with one of these other ones that will actually, for a lower price, give me both the BRCA mutations and some of these other ones that we talked about? But again, they don't have as much data, and if I get a weird mutation in a RIG51, gosh, I don't know what to do with that as a clinician. So it's a real struggle for us, and we talk about it a lot, about what to do. So the benefits of genetic testing, I think everybody here already knows about it. It helps us change what we do for an individual, with the goal being to prevent cancer ideally, or if we can't prevent it, to pick it up early where we really impact survival. The limitations is that we don't know every mutation that causes cancer. We have these variants. We just don't know everything that we need to know. And so when we get the genetic test result, if it's positive for a known mutation, we know exactly what to do with it. If it's negative, it either means there's one of these weird things that we don't know about, and the variants we still don't know what to do with. Keep hitting the button, but it doesn't go. So what can we do? So breast cancer, I'm just going to whip through this because I know we have about 2 seconds. Screening, we want to pick things up early. Chemoprevention, give women drugs that might prevent cancer. Okay, and if we had a drug that prevented either breast or ovarian cancer with no side effects, we could all retire because it would be a blockbuster. But unfortunately, everything that we have has side effects, so you're always weighing the pros and the cons of doing these interventions. And Joanna's already alluded to the surgical risk reduction. I mean, it's almost like taking an atomic bomb to take care of a problem. We are taking everything out because we just can't know for sure why women are getting things and how we can prevent it in a less destructive manner. And I am a surgeon, so I'm all about destruction, but it's not the best thing, I think. So for screening, breast self-exam, clinical breast exam, mammograms, and we add in breast MRI. So that's the new thing, or the thing that we recommend for women at higher risk. For chemoprevention, tamoxifen and raloxifene are drugs that are anti-estrogen, so they do decrease breast cancer, but again, they have those side effects we already alluded to, so people aren't real excited about taking them because of the side effects. And then for surgery, we remove the breasts. We also, one thing to mention is if you remove the ovaries in women, it also reduces not only their ovarian cancer, but their breast cancer risk as well. And still trying to figure out exactly which group of women will that help. It looks like it might help more for the BRCA2, not the BRCA1. So are we taking out ovaries and doing harm with cardiac risk in a group of women that we shouldn't be doing it on? And again, these are all things that are a moving target right now. Ovarian cancer, same 3 options, so we're not very imaginative. The difference is, I don't know if there are any Monty Python fans, but ovarian cancer screening is horrible, does not work. And so we're still working with trying to figure out better ways for that. And the reason it doesn't work is it's a low prevalence of disease. We don't know if there's a pre-invasive component that we can catch. There are high false positive rates, and the false positive, if you've had a mammogram with a false positive, you get a biopsy. Not fun, but not horrible. You have ovarian cancer screening, you have a false positive, you get surgery, because that's the only way to figure things out. And the shocking thing still is that even though we know all the big trials haven't shown improvements in survival with ovarian cancer screening, still 1/3 of physicians think it works. And the majority of patients think it works. So we still have a lot to go in terms of what to do with ovarian cancer screening. And so you don't want to screen normal risk women. We do screen high-risk women again because the risks are so high. Prevention, already talked about birth control pills and surgery. It's the same thing, but again, taking out a woman's ovaries at 40 is not optimal, okay? So it would be really great to have a better way to do that. Dr. Myriad Genetics here has done some seminal work looking at that maybe a lot of ovarian cancer is not coming from the ovaries, it's coming from the fallopian tubes. So could we get away in some of these high-risk women with just taking out the fallopian tubes and leaving their ovaries in, where they'll still have their hormones, which is the main benefit of keeping your ovaries, and the jury's still out on that. We're looking into that. So we have to identify these high-risk women, and having screening and testing available is the way that we're going to do it. And so we're not going to do questions now because we're going to let the lawyer talk. Yeah, don't say
So yes, I am the lawyer. But I play over here a lot, so be nice to me. So I'm going to cover today some of the legal questions and perhaps clarify some of what the legal issues are behind some of this. And also, I want to raise something that many of us in the audience talk to students a lot about, and that is there is a difference between law and ethics. And you actually need to start examining that. And I would argue that ultimately what we're dealing with is perhaps a story more about ethics than law. And so we should pull that apart. You're right, this doesn't work. So how did you do it?
Try that
there.
silver bar.
The silver one does work. So this is a picture of Myriad Genetics. And I told you I was going to talk about law. Right now I'm going to talk a little bit about business. I actually play in lots of schools. So if we look at this, a couple things to look at here is Myriad is right now trading at 25. That was this morning's stock price. It's actually somewhat near its low over 52 weeks. And I would argue that that is not entirely accidental. Some of it has to do with the Supreme Court case last June. Some of it has to do with the fact that Myriad has made itself into the poster child for perhaps not ethical behavior. And so what I put here is maybe a case study in business ethics. And in fact, I do a lot of work with Andy Wicks over at Darden. And I think this will make a fantastic, I can't wait to turn this into a business case. Because if you look at it, there are a lot of decisions Myriad could have made differently. And interestingly enough, and this isn't coming out until now today, there are lots of companies that are actually doing the same thing and no one's talking about them. So that's a piece that we need to pull back and say, okay, is this different? Perhaps what we have here is a perfect storm of a company possibly behaving badly, the most active patient group that exists in the United States, and a whole series of events going on in our culture where we're actually starting to look at data differently overall. So, as we learned, Myriad has patents on BRCA 1 and 2. If you actually remember in the film clip, you actually saw a whole hallway of patents. And it was kind of fun because Mark Skolnick actually says, well, they're all easy, you know, and they're all ethical, etc. The interesting question, though, is that the Supreme Court actually only dealt with a couple of those patents. The rest of the patents are out there, and they are still valid, although they are expiring soon. Now, another interesting thing is the only thing that people know Myriad for is BRCA analysis. They actually have a whole lot of other products, and in fact, one of the things because I try and figure out why people behave badly when they behave badly, so I went and said, okay, do they have only a single product? The company is going to actually hang on this, and if they don't actually protect it, they're just out of luck. The reality is no, because of their actual considerable early experience with BRCA, they actually have a whole slew of products, and a really interesting one in the pipeline if you look at it for lung cancer diagnosis. So this is not their only product, and I hope they're going to learn from this product of what not to do with their other products. So, their course of conduct with their intellectual property. And some of this came out during the film, and I'll just try and clarify exactly how the different pieces worked. As I just said, they had numerous BRCA patents. Patent law is very complicated. I'm not going to try and walk you through it, but what I will say is there are the patents on the genes that are the subject of the Supreme Court case that we'll talk about in a minute. There are also what are called method patents and other types of patents related to different pieces of this that were actually not in play in the Supreme Court. Most of the BRCA patents are expiring soon. So at a certain level, whether they won or lost, it was all going to be over in a couple of years on the patent piece. They have been the most active company that I know of in terms of protecting their intellectual property rights. And mostly in the United States. Incidentally, they did not, we heard about Canada, for example, they also didn't protect their patent nearly as seriously in Australia, which was an interesting question, and Europe has a different patent scheme as well. The interesting piece, and this is alluded to, Joanna alluded to it as well, and that is somewhere in the middle of 2006. We're actually not sure when they made the decision because no one, they certainly didn't announce it. But until the middle of the 2000s, Myriad was actively sharing its data in public access databases. And sometime between 2004 and 2006, it just stopped. And we won't be privy to that business decision. But that's actually the subject of what we're talking about with the free the data. We no longer, we get some of that large scale data that Susan showed you, but we no longer have access to all of that other data. Now, one thing you also saw in the film clip, and that was Mark Skolnick, and this quote actually comes from the film clip itself, but to capture it a little bit, the group that was in that laboratory 7 days a week were doing it to beat the other team, and we won. And that, I think, captures for you some of the sort of business ethics ethos that's going on here. This is our property, we have a right, we worked really, really hard to produce this, and we have a right to profit from it. Certainly you should be able to understand that. Perhaps, perhaps not. So the Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court case was heard last spring in rapid order for the Supreme Court, turned around by June, it had to, that's the end of the term, with a decision on this, and it was one of the things that was complicating my life last spring, was trying to predict what it would do. It's hard to imagine for people who have gotten used to discussions about BRCA that in our world, the legal world, this was essentially when pigs fly, is the court overturning a gene patent. It's important to know there are zillions that may be overstating it, but there are thousands of gene patents out there. And so the idea of actually saying you can't patent a gene was viewed as something that was impossible and would also, and this actually came up very importantly in the Supreme Court argument, would completely stymie innovation in an area where innovation is necessary. And in fact, the Supreme Court was very, very wary of that. So the sole question before the court was, are human genes patentable? That's actually phrased very broadly. It was phrased by the ACLU, which was one of the claimants in this case, purposely broadly, but it was actually very narrow before the court itself. And it actually raised, in terms of popular culture, a metaphysical question of who owns my genes. But the court was not engaging with that metaphysical question at all. The court was actually engaging with a question of patent law. And it ends up with a technical, and it's hard to, you can mix this up with the current court, but this is conservative with a little c, not big C, response. And that is, the answer was very simply, isolated DNA is a product of nature. You did not manipulate it enough to earn a patent, but cDNA, or synthetic DNA, as used different terms, is patentable. So this means that Myriad continues to own a lot of patents on BRCA and, in fact, other patents. But its monopoly, which is what a patent is, it's a monopoly, right, over BRCA isolated gene is now over. It arguably had that monopoly for 15 years without having the legal right to have so, based on the current Supreme Court opinion. Oops, it went backwards. So the question before us today is, what about all the data we keep hearing referred to? Who owns that? And the answer is Myriad does, at least legally. This data is treated by the law as a trade secret. And a trade secret is valuable information, commercially valuable because it's not generally known. And there are lots and lots of trade secrets out there. And as I point out here, it could be a formula, a computer program, it can be a recipe for Coca-Cola, it can be your customer lists, any non-public information, and trade secrets are protected by both state and federal law. In this case, it's data gathered while selling another service or product. And unlike patents, which have a term at which they expire, trade secrets actually never expire. The limit on a trade secret is whether it becomes public or not. As long as you can keep it private, you actually can maintain your trade secret. And so what we have with Free the Data is a brilliant, clever, Myriad would probably say diabolical, way of dealing with this trade secret problem, which is when Myriad provides the data during the BRCA analysis to patients, they have it, but they have a tiny piece of it, their data. But if the patients join together and pull all the data together, what they have done is for each piece of that data, they have eliminated the trade secret, because the company can't keep them from doing that. They only can try and maintain the privacy in their own four walls. So this raises a few questions we have is, are these the same? We have a national, perhaps international conversation going on now, is they are the same legally. I might actually argue I think they should stay the same legally. But should they stay the same ethically? One way, and in fact, the typical business way for a company like Myriad to deal with this is don't even raise the question, eliminate it by providing the data. And they are now getting many calls to do so. We'll see what happens. This is part of a larger conversation. We have a lot of genetic data biobanked out here. Much of it gathered in things that seem to be completely innocuous. Ancestry.com, National Geographic now has a method of finding out how human migration has gone on through the eons. But all of this means they have the data from the DNA, and in fact they have the DNA. What can they do with that? It raises competing research paradigms. Do we have open access research? Does that actually make research go faster? Or by providing intellectual property, do you actually create the incentive for the Mark Skolnicks of the world to actually go faster, harder with research? And finally, we have a much bigger conversation. What do we do with the zillions and zillions and zillions of bytes of data that are out there on us? Can I say that genetic data is different than the data that Facebook might gather? Possibly Facebook might save me faster. And we have to actually have an ethics conversation as to what all this means. The law should follow the ethics. Thank you. Thanks to all three, and we have just a couple of minutes for questions. I think John is going to bring Joanna back up on the screen. So we do have the opportunity to include her in our conversation just for the last couple of minutes, and I think she'd also be willing to stay on and take some questions after we finish the hour, as may the other panelists as well. So we have questions, comments?
All right.
Hi again, Joanna. Joanna, do you have anything you'd like to say in response to the two presentations that followed you?
I thought one thing I wanted to say is that I'm so grateful for Dr. Modesitt's presentation and in saying that there's been nothing in 17 years. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Just fine.
Okay, sorry. In saying that there's been nothing in 17 years, I don't want to discount all the things that she pointed out, like the use of the birth control pill and breast MRI. I think what I'm really looking for, and we're all looking for, is a true preventative option. And that's what I want for my daughters. I don't want removing body parts, as she said, throwing in an atomic bomb, which is a great analogy. I don't want that to be their future. I am in menopause at 40, and there are some real repercussions to that. And that's why I cling to free the data. And that sort of takes me to, I learned so much during Professor Riley's presentation, and it's interesting to place it into this larger context. And I think why Myriad is standing out is that they've had the opportunity to act ethically, to lower the cost of the testing, to open the data stream again and go back to publishing it, and to answer why they're not publishing it. And they continue to engage with the community that they're trying to serve. Even though they have other products, their biggest revenue is coming from the BRCA population. That's what built that company. And I think there's an ethical, not a legal, an ethical responsibility to help that community and help provide better answers. They are not doing any research, as far as I know. They weren't. I was there in 2007, and they have a pharmaceutical side. I'm talking better option prevention for BRCA cancer. So that's an ethical question.
We have a question from the audience.
Raise your hand. You have a question?
Everybody's ready to say.
I'll grab that one.
Okay, thanks.
You just want to identify yourself?
Yeah.
Recording this.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm a student of Professor Riley's, and I actually worked with Joanna Rudnick this summer at Genetic Alliance. One question I kind of have is about the legal aspects of freeing the data, specifically in terms of patient privacy. So one point that we really had an issue with in terms of getting women to free their data and sending their information is that the information they were sending in is essentially private medical information, specifically genetic information, which is much more sensitive in the fact that it doesn't contain just their information, but also their family, potentially their family history. So I was wondering if any of the panelists had anything to say about how we can get over kind of that hump, that privacy issue, in terms of getting women to free their data and their Myriad results.
So I think this works, right, Stephanie? First of all, I should say that Sharon Terry, who's Stephanie was working, was well aware of these privacy issues, so we were lucky in many senses. I could have imagined someone come up with this idea and not be aware of the privacy issues. So they actually built into the whole freedom of the data structure ways of protecting the privacy piece within it. And interestingly, with the BRCA, it's probably the family data that's more important. You actually have this individual with a diagnosis already in many cases with the BRCA. It's their family that wouldn't be out in the open and also doesn't have the ability to give consent to this data piece. I think it's part of a whole combination of pieces. It's part of how do we deal with genetic discrimination generally, which Gina started, but it hasn't certainly finished, which is the law dealing with genetic privacy. It's how do we deal with other pieces of the way we treat people in society, if they are they stigmatized by genetic anomalies, differences. Ultimately, we've all got them. It's just some are being discovered sooner than later. So I think Free the Data is an experiment. It's the first time I've ever seen something like this go. It is, as was described, a grassroots movement. It may grow, and especially when you think of Genetics Alliance, which deals with many different types of genetic issues. So I think you have to think of genetic data as both a benefit and a liability. And the real question for us, and I can't answer, if I could answer this, I'd be with you, I'd have the holy grail. But it's a societal question, is how do we make sure we can maximize benefits and limit the liabilities? Part of it's by starting to talk about it.